Hey everyone, and I'm back with another tutorial, and in this one I'm going to be painting this long black shiny fur. So if you're interested in seeing how I did this, then stick around because it's coming right up. So I've added the reference photo in bottom corner so you can see where it is I'm painting. And as you can see, I'm just getting the black underpainting on at the minute. You don't have to be tidy and precise when you're doing this, just get it all covered up in that black. And yeah, I do use black, it's not some combination of other colours, it's just black. If you don't want to use black and you want to make your black up using different colours, then that's absolutely fine, but I just find it easier to just use black paint. You'll probably need to layer it up a couple of times before you get it nice and opaque and not showing out from underneath. Like in my case, it's that blue paint that I used as the background colour, or it might just be white paper or white canvas or whatever it is that you've got on your background. So just ensure it's nice and smooth and no brush strokes and out showing from underneath. So once that's all done and dry, you can start working on some fur texture. As you can see, I'm starting on that here, and I'm just looking at the reference photo where the general clumps of hairs and things like that are, and I'm applying some in quite a dark grey colour at the minute. I'm not getting too light. You don't want to work up in value too quickly with this, you want to work up gradually. So I'm just starting off with a value that's just a little bit lighter than your black, and adding in your clumps of hairs and things like that and some texture, making sure you pay attention to the direction that the fur is actually laying in. There are some areas that remain a little bit darker between your clumps and things like that, so make sure you don't overwork them areas. Leave some areas with less work on them and let that black show through, and then you can work up in tone on the other areas where there's not really any black going on, because there's a lot of light reflecting on fur in that area. You don't have to be too tidy in that first layer. I might use a larger rigger brush or even a small round brush to do this work, as long as it's got a reasonable point on it. You don't want to use too small a brush because it'll take you ages. I do start adding some colours at this stage, so I can see some blues and also some deep rich browns and what have you going on in this dog's coat, so I am bearing that in mind as I'm working up in these layers as well. But you can also add it later as a glaze when you've started working up in value. I'm using a larger rigger brush now, it's a size number 2 or 3. Starting to tidy up this fur texture a little bit. I've not really gone any lighter in tone, I'm just tidying things up a little bit, adding a little bit more definition and some more air strokes and what have you. At this stage I might move back and forwards between values, still coming back in with some blacks to add some gaps and what have you between your clumps of, lighter hair where you've got your light reflecting off it, and then coming back in again with some lighter tones and just putting some hairs like overlapping the edges of these gaps and crisscrossing across them and things like that, as hair tends to do. Some of the clumps form into like a point, so the hairs that are coming down the shaft of the clump will also to converge at the end to form this sort of like a point. The fur on a lot of animals does this naturally, especially when they get wet, because it encourages the water to drip off the fur then, and so that it doesn't go down onto dog's skin or the animal's skin, whatever it is, so you get like a spiky effect. But you can also get it to an extent when they're dry as well, it does tend to clump into like points. Even my own hair does it. I know when we were kids it were always referred to as rat's tails, a sign that your hair needed a good brush. And my hair were the type of hair that formed these really easily, so annoying. So you can see that I'm gradually working up in value now, just getting that little bit lighter. I'm still using a larger rigger brush because I've got a larger area to cover here, and using a smaller rigger brush should just take too long. I'm focusing more on the air texture now and the details, so I'm getting a little bit more tidy with my strokes and what have you, and also taking care not to cover up too much of that work underneath. You want some of that texture underneath to always be showing through, because that's what gives the depth, well, the impression of depth to the fur that you're painting, is to be able to see your different layers of your fur from your different layers of your painting. So you don't want to be completely covering up your underlayers. Even though I'm looking at the reference photo to see what I need to paint, I'm not doing every single clump and strand of hair exactly the same as what it is in reference photo. I'm just looking at it as a general reference kind of thing, and then just applying the knowledge of the light and the texture and what have you to the paper. Obviously, because it were a private commission, I didn't want to make it too different. It needed to look like the dog in the photo. So I tried to loosely stick to the general clumps and the patterning of the coat as it shows in the reference photo. But obviously I weren't going to stick to it 100%, because if you try and make every single hair and clump exactly the same as it is in reference photo, it just don't work very well. It looks stiff and lifeless and what have you. It just don't look right. So never try to do that. Even when you're doing realism, don't try to make every last little hair exactly the same as in reference photo. Just get a general idea of what's actually going on, and just learn to understand the texture and the way that the light hits the hair and all, and the way that the hair clumps together and things like that, and just go by that rather than you know, copying the photo like a slave kind of thing. You don't want to be going that far. So yeah, you'll see some subtle differences between my painting and the reference photo, but that's why you'll see these differences, is because I'm not copying it like a slave. And it's not one of them things that contributes really importantly to the overall look and expression of the dog anyway. I mean, things like your eyes and your nose and that kind of thing, your general shape of your head and all that sort of stuff is going to matter more, but the way that the fur is on the chest, so long as it looks like the same kind of fur and it's the right colour and right texture and right length, and it's, you know, the clumps are similar, it doesn't need to be exact to make it look like that same dog. So anyway, I did do a full video of this particular montage, which includes all the other studies that are in it as well. So if you want to watch that, then you can, I'll link to it above, I'll put it up in top corner there. It gives you a little bit more information about the actual subject as well, the dog that's in the painting. Obviously in this video I'm just focusing on a tutorial doing the actual hair on his chest. And you can see that I'm continuing to work up in tone. I mean, the highlights look a lot brighter in the footage than they do in photo, but they weren't like that in actual real life. And I'm also going to be coming in with a bit of glazing very shortly. And here I am with glazing. I'm using a round brush and just applying some really watered down transparent burnt umber, I think it is. And I'm applying it a lot to your transition areas between the darker areas and then the areas that are catching a lot of light. But I'm also adding a really thin layer of it just to some of the highlighted areas as well, just to warm them up that little bit, because you can see some warmer brown tones in that reference photo. I'll also be coming in and creating a few darker gaps and just darkening some of these highlights down a little bit, so that they're not going to end up actually being the highlights. They will end up actually being the mid values, and then I'll be coming back off at top with some highlights later on. So I'm just using it also to add a little bit of definition to the clumps and darken any way that I overworked a little bit with my previous layer. Because acrylic dries so quickly, it's really advantageous when you can just use a bit of glazing to tone some, you know, when you've overworked it a little bit with your highlights, you can just glaze it and make it a little bit darker again. And to be honest, you can just keep doing this until you get it looking how you want it to look. I also came in with a few blues and things like that, And then when I finished my glazing, I got back to working on some highlights and things again, and some little individual layers that were catching light, and flyaway strands that don't want to sit all uniform with rest of air. It's things like this that makes it look more authentic and realistic when you've done. So don't try to make the air look too perfect. Always include a few flyaways and little layers that are sticking it wrong direction and that kind of thing. And don't go too overboard with your highlights at this stage. You want to be trying to maintain most of what you already had underneath showing through, and then just add some highlights to small areas, and it looks a lot better that way. You don't want to be putting too many highlights on, otherwise you'll just flatten it again, and then you'll have to do another glazing layer and start over. So now I'm just fine tuning everything and just adding some final details, and also working on a few transitions where your highlighted hair goes into darkness, basically just making it a little bit less abrupt. You'll see me applying a few mid-tones and darker tones in there just to so it's not so abrupt and what have you, and just making it look the way that I want it to look, and just looking at your reference photo just to get an idea of what needs to be changed and what needs to be worked on. Obviously, like I say, you don't want to make everything exact same as what it is in photo, but you do want to get an authentic look to the actual texture and the light and all that kind of thing. So that's mainly what you're using your reference photo for at this point. So I'm coming to the end of this tutorial now. I've nearly finished this section, and I'll give you a final reveal. And if you liked this video, please give it a like, because it really does help my channel to grow so that I can continue making tutorials for you all. And I think that'll do it for now, so I'll see you in the next video. Bye!